why I chose to walk away from an offer of publication from a Big Five house. So, if you are trying to get if you're in the process of submitting your manuscript to agents and publishers, this is going to interest you. So, if you've never heard of me before, my name's Louisa. I'm an author. I'm a book coach for nonfiction authors. And I like to talk about the behind the scenes of the traditional publishing industry because this stuff was really lacking for me when I was first trying to get a book deal, trying to get published, trying to become an author for the very first time. And it really impacted the the ease and flow with which I could achieve that. So I'm going to share in this video just some reasons why I chose to walk away from a Big Five publishing offer. And I'm also going to share with you why you'll learn some of the things that you might want to ask if you're in negotiations with an agent at the moment, with a publisher, if you have just pitched your book, if you're waiting to hear back with offers. This video is really going to help you. So my intention here is just to share behind the scenes with what I chose, what I learned, what I did, and your career, your life is completely up to you. But I just found that this stuff is really lacking in author education. And it feels very much to me like the agents and the publishing houses all have the upper hand because of this. And first-time authors are really at a disadvantage because they don't understand how these little things can really impact the success and lifespan of your book. And as the author, I'm an author. Everything that I teach comes from that perspective, that this is your book, particularly if it's a nonfiction book, so a memoir, a biography, any kind of nonfiction book. It's usually very, very connected to your personal passions, expertise, legacy, mission, ultimate message. And very often, with nonfiction authors, the first or only book that you get published is often the only one that you want to get published. So if you don't know this stuff the first time, you can make ill-informed or little-informed decisions that mean that your book, even if it is traditionally published, doesn't get the ultimate success that you really wish for. And I know that this was true for me with my first book, which was a travel memoir. I didn't know so much about publishing at that time, so much about what to ask, what to look for. I was just so grateful that a publisher wanted to turn my manuscript into a printed and published book. And I didn't know exactly what to ask and what to look for. So that's why I'm creating this video. So for just a little bit of my own background, I wrote and sold my first book in 2009. And as I said, it was a travel memoir. I did have an agent. I ended up firing that literary agent. She was with one of the big literary agencies here in Australia that gets a lot of international deals. It wasn't the right fit. And so I pitched my own book very quickly on my own. And I got the publishing deal within a week. So that was for my travel memoir, which is Love and Other U-Turns. The publisher that I went with it's considered an independent publisher, Allen and Unwin. They're an award-winning independent publisher. I chose them. I chose to pitch to them because I had been reading a lot of travel memoirs at the time, and they had published some of the ones that I liked. So this is a really good thing to look for if you are, deciding who to pitch to and who you'd like to be published with. Is take a look at comparative titles in your category that you're writing in and see who's publishing them. Read the acknowledgements. Okay, so that book was published. 11 Other U-Turns was published in 2010. It sold relatively well for a first-time author. I wasn't, as I said before, I was very green to the publishing world. And and I did get quite a lot of publicity when the book came out. But there are a few things going on in the publishing world which I didn't realize at the time would negatively impact my book sales. One of those was it was the first year that Kindles and ebooks had started to be produced. And ebooks actually outsold printed copies that year. And my book, there hadn't actually been anything in the contract about the ebook version because it was totally new to publishing here in 2010. Thankfully, Allen and Unwin did produce it as an ebook, but I think it was about 3 or 4 months after the print paperback had come out. And so even though I'd been doing all this publicity, getting all this publicity and coverage and media attention, that wasn't really capitalized with the ebook version. So anyway, that's just one particular aspect. Another thing was the cover. I wasn't 100% happy with the cover in the end. And it did get categorized in the wrong areas of bookshops. It was a memoir, a travel memoir, and I remember Borders was still a bookshop then. I remember finding it in military history, even though it has a pink cover and the word love on the title. For some reason, it had been filed in military history. And it would be... I remember friends texting me and saying, I've just looked at this bookshop in Melbourne and found it in just strange categories. Very often it was categorized as fiction. And I think a lot of that had to do with the cover. So the cover has a big impact on book sales and how your book is stocked and categorized as well by booksellers and retailers and online. So that's all just a bit of background for you. My second book was A Letter from Paris, which is now was published in 2018 and reprinted in various formats and editions in different countries around the world. And so this is really where I finally got to use all this hard-won knowledge that I had learnt through becoming an author for the first time with Love and Other U-Turns. And honestly, I didn't know if I would ever write another book because, particularly with first-time authors with memoir, when it's your own story, it is quite an intense process, particularly the publicity process, even when it's not what you'd term a sad or misery memoir. It is quite grueling, being the face of this book when it is your experience that was written as well, because, people can say the craziest things to you, and it's that feeling of being open to basically anything. And most of the feedback and responses was really wonderful, but it's very personal. And when people say things about your book and it's a memoir or a true story, even an email or a review, it cuts very differently when it is a true story. So and often as well, when people give you feedback and it's something that was completely out of your control, say the cover or the title or something that slipped past one of the editors or something, that can feel really personal as well. Whereas I don't think that fiction authors, I know that, negative or mean feedback is mean. It's not very good for anyone. But with memoir particularly, it's a whole different mind game. So my second book, the reason I'm sharing all this background is because it's important to how I made decisions about walking away from a top 5 publishing deal. So Allen and Unwin had published Love and Other U-Turns. And I remember thinking I really loved them. I loved the publisher and the editor that I worked with there. And I learnt so much about the traditional publishing industry just from being directly engaging with them directly rather than having a literary agent. And I was really grateful for that because my editor and my publisher, Louisa, were really, really open and honest with me. Louisa used to send me my sales figures because I'm not sure if you are aware, but you can't actually check your sales figures unless you're published by Amazon, but that's another story. And they were just really great. And I learned a lot behind the scenes of what goes on with choosing covers, choosing titles, the whole production side of it and what sells and what doesn't sell and what's perceived as a negative title and that sort of thing. So with A Letter from Paris, I made the decision very early on that that I wasn't going to write the book until I had a book deal. Because I had been working on a novel previously and I'd finished the novel, I'd edited it, I'd revised it so many times, but the deal seemed elusive to me. And, a book is a lot of work, and I didn't want to write a whole book on spec again because, hey, I'd already had one published, it sold well, and I could prove that I had written in this genre. So I went and pitched a letter from Paris before I'd even written the manuscript. Now, you can only do this with memoir if you've previously published a memoir before, because publishers and agents need to see that you can actually write an entire book, that they need proof of this, and a previously published book in that category, traditionally published, is said proof. So if this is your first memoir, you probably won't get a book deal just from a pitch or a proposal. You need to have a well-written manuscript. So I was determined to get the deal before I went to all the effort required, because it was a memoir and a biography of my late father. It was quite a complex story, and it required a lot of research. And it was very, very different to Love and Other U-Turns, my first book. And I wrote a blog post which got quite a bit of engagement and feedback. And from that blog post, I started interacting with a publisher, a top 5. She was moving to be heading one of the top 5 publishers, which is, I'm not sure. I mean, they changed quite a bit, but at the time that included Penguin Random House, Simon and Schuster, I think, Harlequin or HarperCollins, Pan Macmillan, and it's another one, Hachette Livre. So she was from one of those houses. I'm not going to say which one. And I had really, really wanted the experience of being published by a big 5. It's really one of those things that I think every author has these visions and dreams of, yeah, that's the ultimate. I want a big 5 publisher to offer me a deal, because there's a lot of beliefs that they will give you lots more marketing, they have a lot more money, they'll give you, they've got a bigger team, and they can print more copies of your book, you'll get a bigger advance, all that sort of thing. And it's actually not true. Pardon me, it's only true sometimes. But anyway, I was really excited though, because I had interest from a big 5 publisher. But this was a really personal book. As I said before, it's a biography as well as a memoir of my late father. And I didn't want it to be published. I just didn't want to make a decision that was going to impact the way the book was edited, the way the book was presented, the way the book was marketed, detrimentally, because this is my life. This was my family history that I was publishing. This was my heart and soul work. It was a very, very personal memoir, and it required a lot of deep digging on my part. And I just wanted to feel that I could fully trust whoever was the editor or the publisher of this work to do a really good job, and to raise it to a really high standard. I also was ambitious. I wanted this book to sell out of Australia. Now, this was something that had disappointed me with my first book. We had only been, Love and Other U-Turns, even though it was produced as an ebook, Kindle, it was only produced in Australia. It wasn't released overseas. A lot of this is where a lot of Australian authors don't really understand how this stuff works, and I never understood until I was published. But unless you have, say, a foreign rights team of the publisher that you've chosen, who are really energetic and vivacious and get out there and pitch to their international offices and foreign markets at things like what's it called? The London Book Fair or the Frankfurt Book Fair. there's various international European book fairs where your book can be sold for different translation rights and reprinted in different countries and re-released. Unless your publisher has a team that is focused on that, it's probably only going to be it's only going to stay in this market, Australia Pacific. Which is a real shame because there's so many international angles for that book, Love and Other U-Turns, and I had high hopes that it would be picked up by foreign markets because it's a road trip, and I sort of thought, oh, well, this is a really good travel memoir for international markets. So even though Allen and Unwin were a great publisher, and I don't regret going with them, I didn't know because I didn't have an agent at the time. There was no one pitching it to foreign markets. And I also, because I had, since that book had been out, I have a lot of friends who'd been published. One had a memoir published by a Big Five in Australia, and they never pitched it to foreign markets either. So she, again, had all these dreams of it being an international bestseller. And she was offered a great advance with a Big Five publisher, but it was never published out of Australia. They didn't even pitch it. And there's only a few publishing houses in Australia that do have those relationships and do go out and pitch you individually and have those relationships. It's there's a word for it. Australia is it parochial? And I had found, even in my conversations with different literary agents, that they were almost like a surgeon giving you the worst possible case scenario to basically never think that your work could be published out of Australia, which I find totally bizarre because concepts are universal, particularly, the way I teach memoir is that these are universal concepts and things that affect people across the world. And there is a lot that we have to offer as authors in Australia that international markets can benefit from. But I've since learnt through dealing with agents overseas as well. I had an agent in North America that, the Australian publishers just aren't energetically pitching our work, even the Big Fives. So that is one reason that I was a little bit suspicious of a Big Five. I wanted to make sure, not suspicious, but I knew that it wasn't all about the book advance or the name of the publishing house, even if it was an international one like HarperCollins or Penguin Random House, because it really depends on who's working there at the time and what sort of relationships they have with certain editors and international offices. So I had an offer for a letter from Paris. I had an offer from a Big Five. And I also, actually, there were two offers from Big Fives. And I also had an offer from Scribe. I went with Scribe. The reason I did this is because, oh gosh, where do I begin? I want to help you if you're making these kinds of decisions. I knew that regardless of the advance, regardless of the name of the publisher being, amazing or not so amazing, their reputation among the general public, my experience as an author was going to be much better if I could have certain things in this book that was published, A Letter from Paris, be done really, really well. And top of my list was the cover. I wanted the cover to be something really, really good that I would feel proud to see. And Scribe, I had studied their covers and I had never, ever seen a Scribe cover that I didn't like of a Scribe book. Now, you might think that a cover is a superficial reason to choose a publisher, but it wasn't the only reason. The real reason and the real thing that might help you if you are in negotiations or the submissions process for your book is, particularly if it's a memoir, personal story, When you're negotiating, when you're talking with publishers, you'll go out and meet them before they make an offer. Generally, you'll go and do a meet and greet, maybe talk to one of the editors that might be working on your book. They will generally show you, or you should ask if they don't, where they see your forthcoming book sitting in the marketplace. So if it's a memoir, they will show you similar titles that they've published, or they'll say, yeah, I see it like this, da 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 da. When I had met with one of these big five publishers in Australia, in their big glamorous Sydney offices, the book that publisher pulled out was I struggled to see any kind of similarity or comparison with what I was hoping to achieve with my book. I'm not, I haven't named any names here. To put it mildly, the cover and the book that they showed me was tawdry. It was really, really, it looked very cheap. It looked very tacky. It was sort of like, it wasn't true crime, but it was in that kind of vein. And my book that I was, pitching, and at that point, was a very, very deep and personal family story. And I wanted it to be sensitively considered. So that was sort of a red flag to me, that the only sort of comparative title that this particular publishing imprint could show me was a little bit tawdry, and I did not like the cover at all, and I didn't like the way that it was sort of positioned in their market. So you might like, how you can benefit from this is when you're meeting with agents and publishers, ask them where they see your book sitting in their stable, I guess you'd say, in their printed titles. And do you like those books that they've positioned yours with? The other sort of red flag from this particular top five publisher, now remember I said no to two, even though, yes, it would have been a great advance, would have been very glamorous to be backed by this publisher, to have that particular, top publishing brand behind my work. The other thing that I didn't like was how it was being positioned in their sales meetings. So when you are pitching a book, you need to get certain sales documents to the publisher or the editor or your agent. At that point, I didn't have an agent. I did get an agent a little bit later. And this publisher kept asking me for to pull out certain bits of the story and extrapolate on them. And I didn't want it to be pitched as that kind of story. So I sort of was thinking, oh, do I have to write this version of the story for them to publish it? And honestly, that's not something that I wanted to do. I think what you've got to remember, and I knew this from hard-won experience, but so many first-time authors don't know this, and that on a knowing level, experience level, if you write something because a publisher asks you to write it that way, you might get a book deal. Yeah, your book will get published, but your name is on that book forever. A book lasts a long time. So if you tell a story in a way that does not sit well with you on a core, spiritual, for want of a better word, level, aligned with your values, then that's something you're going to have to live with for a very long time. And I knew from the publicity process and the media process of launching my first memoir that I did not want to be focusing on certain elements of the story, and because of how intense that publicity process is when it is a memoir. And I just was really, really anchored into what I wanted this book to become. And so I was getting these really just not good vibes from what that publisher was trying to pull out of me for the pitch to her sales team. Yeah, she would have got it over the line, and she did, because she offered me a publishing deal. But it did make me worry that if I did go with that publisher, something had been lost in translation, and I wouldn't be able to, I wouldn't feel that good about the book that they wanted from me. Um, the Another thing that you might like to ask in a meeting with and this all everything that I'm saying about choosing between publishers is also going to apply to choosing between agents. When you're talking about your book and meeting with a literary agent or meeting with a publisher, top five, independent, small press, whatever, ask them where they see your book sitting in their stable. I know that sounds like it's pushy. What do they like about your book? You want to know things like that. What appealed to them about the pitch, and why are they interested in publishing this? You've got to come back to you, because your name is going on this book, not theirs. Their brand is going on it, but for an author, particularly a nonfiction author, when it's a biography or a memoir, this is your career. This is a long-term product that is going to be connected with your name. So ask them what they liked about the pitch, what they liked about the story, because that is going to show you what they'll want to focus on in the marketing of it and the positioning of it in their future titles. And also make sure you ask them about other titles that they've published. I mean, you should know this anyway. When you are submitting your proposal or your query, you want to know who's publishing what sort of comparative titles in your category. But they will have lots of titles that they've been working on that aren't published yet that they'll be able to tell you about. So when I met with Scribe, for example, the editor that I met in that meeting told me about a book that I hadn't actually seen. I didn't know that they'd published. And now I can't remember the name of it, but it was, and I went home and they actually sent me home with some of these books that they saw my forthcoming book sitting amongst. And they were really sensitively written and they were really beautifully done. And I really liked the way that they presented these quite complex family narratives. And so, yeah, comparative titles. So it's a lot of the stuff that you will need to learn to actually pitch a book and to sell it successfully. But in those meetings with publishers and agents, you want to ask them, where they see it being positioned and how they will be choosing to promote it. Or ask them a little bit about the marketing aspect and that sort of thing. Now, what else did I want to share? I've just written my notes here. So foreign rights and foreign deals, that's a big one. So I did say no to two top five publishers and chose Scribe because my goals and vision and dream for that book, if I was going to go to all the effort of researching it and writing it, and I knew it was going to be a lot of effort, it was a lot of work, A Letter from Paris, I wanted it to have the biggest chance of an international deal. I wanted it published in America. I wanted it published in Europe. I wanted to see it in English language bookstores in Paris. I had a list of dreams that I had for that book. And I just thought, I wasn't totally attached to all of them coming true, but I thought, everything that I didn't get with my first book, I want to do all that I can to achieve with my second book. And most people don't get a second chance. So I thought, I'm just going to go all in with all of my desires for this book. And I knew that Scribe had a London office. I didn't, they didn't promise me when I met with the Melbourne office, they didn't promise me that it was going to come out in the UK. But we did chat about that when I was writing and revising parts of it, because if it did have any chance of being published in the UK, I needed to make certain, inclusions or additions to the manuscript. But just knowing that they had a London office, whereas these top five publishers, they're top five and they had international offices, of course, in the US and there's UK versions of there's UK teams for all the big five publishers. Because of the size of those publishers, their connections and relationships with their international offices aren't as close-knit. And so that was why I knew that my friends who'd written memoirs and just been published in Australia with big five publishers hadn't had the opportunity to be published in foreign markets. So the fact that Scribe had a UK office was a really good sign to me. I had no idea that they also had a US team, and that's how it ended up. Also, they're really, really proactive with pitching to foreign markets, because Henry Rosenblum, the owner of Scribe, was born in Europe, and actually speaks French. So I didn't even know that. But this whole international offices and how that whole foreign rights and deals thing worked was really, really important to me. And I also knew it is not all about the advance. I also, by then, because it had been 9 years, I think, since my first book had come out, I have a lot of author friends, and many of them have written memoirs. One had signed a big deal with a top 5 publisher in Australia after being wooed by them, because she had a feature article in a big print publication that went, I guess you would say, viral. And so they made her an offer. They said, turn this into a book-length memoir, and we will give you all this giant advance. They threw her an enormous launch event. They sent copies to all of the major print publications, which I don't know why people think that newspaper reviews sell books, because they don't. But anyway, and then it was actually remaindered 2 or 3 months later, which is when a book is not just taken off the shelves, but pulped. So you can't even get it in a library. Or this book that she had devoted a year to writing, and I knew that she didn't even really enjoy the writing of it. It was sort of something that they had pitched to her, and she just thought, oh yeah, I want to get published. This is an amazing offer. But it actually affected her deeply, because anyone who's written a book, particularly a memoir, knows how much deep diving, how much work it involves, how much internal grueling self-examination it requires. And then 3 months after her book was published with a big 5 publisher, it was pulped. So I knew that things aren't all as they seem with big 5 publishers. That's not to say amazing offers can't come from them. I know a Canadian memoir author who had an amazing offer and deal, which meant that she could buy an incredible house, and the book went really well. I really liked reading the book. I think they did a really good job. But you just need to know what your goals are. You need to actually know who's doing what. And one more thing that I want to add is, and this is why it is so hard when it's your first book deal particularly, you need to know what and how you like to work. So because this was my second memoir, something that I didn't feel like I benefited from with my first book deal was the fact that publisher was in Sydney. I was actually living in Sydney at the time that I got the book deal, but I was back in Melbourne, which is it's another state in Australia, when I was editing it with the editor for it to come before the launch, before it was printed and published. And this made communication with my editor a little bit more difficult, not impossible. We emailed, and documents were sent we did, a round of proofreading on the actual document, which was sent snail mail. And then there was also a PDF that I marked up, and we did, most of it was via email. But if you can have face-to-face meetings with an editor, or even the publicity team, I only had one very brief 15-minute chat in person with the publicist who was pitching and promoting that first book, because they were in Sydney. So the opportunities to speak with them face-to-face just weren't really there. Anytime they were in Melbourne, I would be out the door in a flash to chat to them, but it only happened once or twice. And I think that when you are, particularly with things like pre-publication, so in that 6 months before your book comes out, it's really helpful to have face-to-face meetings with the editor, with the publicity team, the marketing team, even with the publisher, because you just find out a lot more about what's being circulated, how they are positioning your book. You can give them some further information. You can give them stuff like photos to use with the publicity material. You might just tell them something because you're just there, and then they end up working that into the publicity. And I know with A Letter from Paris, I absolutely loved being able to ride my bike, because that's how close I was to the scribe offices, and have these meetings with my editor, not on Zoom, but face to face. And we actually looked at the manuscript. Like, it's a very physical thing to edit a manuscript. And he actually drew me a diagram at one point, which just showed me so much. And I understood so much from that diagram that probably would have taken him 5 pages of email to describe to me. So just a lot can be lost in translation. So I knew that I wanted a local team as well, that would be a lot more valuable to me in the long term, because a lot of little things, so many, if I can leave you with one thing from this rather long masterclass on choosing between publishers, it is to know how many little nuances behind the scenes make a difference to the success of a book, and to how you feel about it being out there, and to the promotion, publicity, attention, and all those decisions behind the scenes at the publishing house, how much you do actually have a say in when you go into these publishing meetings and contracts. So signing with a particular publisher, signing with a particular literary agent, if you are informed as to what could go right or wrong, and all these little things that make up a successful book, a fulfilling book that you are proud to have your name on, that will be around in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and you will be proud of it. That was what mattered to me more than anything. And I knew that a lot of that had to come down to saying no to a more glamorous, potentially much more lucrative offer in the short term, to say yes to a smaller offer that was going to be much more personally fulfilling, successful, and financially successful in the long term. So it's not thinking short term about this, not just taking the first offer that you're given. And so many authors, actually every first time author that I meet, just takes the first offer that they're given, because whether it's from an agent or a publisher, because they don't understand how important these little decisions and things like, how your book is going to be marketed and perceived, the cover, the title, how you are going to be positioned in their market, what sort of relationships they have, how they treat their authors. That's another one. I knew that with a bigger publishing house, I wouldn't have those closer relationships with the editing and marketing team, and that was really important to me. I wanted to be able to pick up the phone and actually speak to them if I needed to. I didn't really end up doing this. I think I called them once. You don't want to be annoying, and I was too busy anyway. But it's more about just not feeling like you're a small cog in a giant, production wheel. That my feelings and my wants and needs for this book would be honoured and listened to, and they really, really were. And I was rewarded for that long-term thinking, because my book did come out in the US, and it did come out in Canada, and it did come out in the UK actually 3 days after the Australian launch, and it was stocked across Paris in all of those bookstores that I had on my dream list, which just still makes me want to cry. So anyway, I hope this has been helpful. If you need any help with your first book deal, I am offering one-on-one mentorship at the moment, and I will link to where you can find out more about that below. But I hope this has been helpful, and please let me know if it was.